recording on our YouTube channel. Other few bits of housekeeping. We will use the chat function as well. So in your Zoom, you should have on your toolbar two little speech bubbles for the chat. And we're gonna post in the next little while a link there to a Miro board that we will use for our breakout groups. And acknowledging that we have people with speaking different languages on this call. And one thing that if English is not your first language that you might want to try and use is the closed caption function in Zoom, which should translate more or less what is said into written word to help you understand a little bit better. And I guess while we're waiting, and to be a little bit more interactive and not just wait, it would be terrific if you can put in the chat from which part of the world you're calling in today, so that we get a good idea of what regions are joining our call. There's still people coming into the meeting room. We're gonna wait a minute longer for everyone to settle in. Thank you so much for people we got people from Malaysia here. I guess I'm calling in from Australia. Quite a lot of people from Asia. We have some colleagues from, Tobias, hello, from San Sebastian in Spain, and Sebastian is calling in from France. And with that, I wanted to as well introduce Sebastian to say hi, and I guess to introduce the team for this webinar and for this project collaboration. Sebastian, I'm not sure if you want to say a word yourself about your role in TNC, or?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Sebastián Cabrera. I work in the global team of conservation and partnership with indigenous peoples and local communities from TNC. And I'm really happy to start this collaboration with the consortium between the Indigenous Conservation Standards Community of Practice, Conservation Management, and this big team of conservation practitioners working on programs and initiatives related to conservation with indigenous peoples and local communities. And what we want to develop here is tools that support more leadership, more inclusion of indigenous peoples in conservation planning, and ultimately support their rights to self-determination. So I'm happy to be with you all here and shape this ideas for the tools together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. And then I would like to introduce my dear colleague and friend, Stuart. Where are you calling in from, Stuart? And who are you actually?
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Some folks I know. Nice to meet some new folks. I'm Stuart Cowell. I see we've got someone else here hanging around in Nipaluna, so it's great, which is where I am, or otherwise known as Hobart in Tasmania. And yeah, I'm with conservation management, so part of the team pulling this together. Those of you who know me would know I've got a background in a lot of healthy country planning, particularly in Australia, and those of you who didn't know that now do. It's good to be here. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, Stuart, for those fun facts. And yeah, last but not least, my name is Frank Weisenberger. Most of you would know me. I've been convening the CCNet Community of Practice Indigenous Conservation Standards projects for a few years. And as part of this project, as Sebastian already alluded to, we are working together with conservation management, with other colleagues in Latin America who are now in the middle of their night and who will be running a webinar in a few hours' time. And the Nature Conservancy. And with that, I would like to quickly kind of jump into the session, what we have planned for you, and so that hopefully you are actually in the right webinar today. So we've done the welcome and the short introduction. We want to give you really briefly, only for a few minutes, a quick project context and an update and a bit of an outlook on the workshop objectives. And the majority of today, we want to spend in breakout sessions to actually work with all of you together using Miro in two breakout groups on those two tools that Sebastian mentioned. And we're going to round that off in a plenary, and then we're going to give a quick outlook on the next steps and what happens after this webinar. So the project context, as Sebastian already mentioned, this project came together to think about tools and practical guidance to better support inclusive and self-determined conservation initiatives with Indigenous people and local communities. And we may ask ourselves, why are we doing this? Well, the situation is, I guess, most of you working in this industry, we know that partnering with Indigenous people it becomes more and more of a buzzword and is more and more important these days, with kind of the involvement or the prominence that has been given to Indigenous people and local communities in conservation in frameworks like the 30x30 framework and many others. And while there is a lot of more and more guidance developed for partnering with Indigenous people, we encountered and heard that from many different sides, that there's very little guidance and tools on how you can actually adapt those management approaches more practically to foster equitable and self-determined conservation. And while we had this conversation with TNC that there is a gap, we came up and over a few months of discussions to come up with a collaboration or a project where TNC is supporting the COP Indigenous CS projects, who is the umbrella or the platform for a consortium of individuals and organizations like Conservation Management as an organization, Stewart as an individual, people like myself and our dear colleague Valentina in Colombia. And the idea is that this collaboration that has come together is to develop resources and materials that can help us support planning and implementing conservation initiatives that lead to more self-determination and Indigenous and community leadership in conservation within the Nature Conservancy, but also across the broader conservation planning practitioner community, which we are all under the umbrella of CCNet. I mentioned the umbrella is CCNet. We have different partners. We have the Nature Conservancy on board, and equally the Nature Conservancy is not only one person, Sebastian, but Sebastian has a team of other collaborators. Christina Lush, that you probably all would know since she's coordinating CCNet for a long time, since at least I joined CCNet many years ago. And another colleague, Brandy Farris, who works in the organization as well. And that team kind of lobbies additionally more connections to the other parts in TNC and to a lot of the country programs to help us out. So yes, that's that. And the way how we want to look at this project is we don't want to start from scratch. There is already a lot of really good guidance that has been developed in specific contexts. As Stuart mentioned earlier on, there is an Australian adaptation of the conservation standards that we have used really successfully here called healthy country planning, that has been done on in a specific regional context. In a similar fashion, there are other adaptations of the conservation standards in other regions of the world, like in Colombia and Ecuador with healthy territory planning, Malama Ikekai approach that has been used for coastal conservation planning in Hawaii. Then there is TNC's own planning approach, internal planning approach, conservation by design, and then there have been other engagement tools and resources developed like the voice, choice, and action network and the principles from there. So there's a lot of materials already out there, and there's no reason to really reinvent the wheel. What we want to do as a group, as a collective in a participatory approach is we want to create specific tools that that help us kind of attack strategic points in the adaptive management cycle to support more self-determination of indigenous people in conservation. We're going to start with this webinar here that focuses on developing the tools or gathering a lot of important input. And then the idea is as well to test those tools and improve those tools together in a similar platforms through webinars, but equally through engaging directly with key people in different regions to help us get a good set of different eyes that look at those materials and to ensure that we're going to create something out of this project that is really meaningful and that can support better territorial management, that empowers local communities and sustains the conservation effort by community leadership and more self-determination. And this workshop today is about two very specific tools that we considered as probably the most strategic places with the biggest leverage in the conservation planning process. And the first tool is in the pre-planning side of things. That's a tool to help projects who start out and to ensure that the considerations for equitable, inclusive, and community-led processes is included from the outset in the planning process. And a second tool that is more that looks more at processes that are already underway, where a conservation project wants to assess where are we on the spectrum of indigenous and community leadership, like where are we currently and where do we want to go and how do we get there. So to link this assessment as well to some specific recommendations on how to go about it. And those two tools are kind of at the focus point of our breakout groups today. So the first breakout group will be looking at a tool or will be brainstorming ideas for a tool in the pre-planning space. This is just an example how that can look like. And those of you who are heavily involved in the conservation standards would know that there are similar decision-making tools in the kind of a pre-planning step of the conservation standards of, is a group ready to plan? So the idea is to have kind of to do an early assessment to figure out where are we going with our planning, like how do we involve people and groups, indigenous people and local communities from the outset. The purpose of this tool or the audience of this tool are in particular conservation practitioners at this early step before a project starts and to ensure that there are good relationships throughout the planning process. And the idea is, and this is again trying to address the gap that there is some guidance there, but not necessarily always practical guidance. The idea is that we want to translate some key principles of what people understand as equitable and self-determined and community-led conservation, and translate those principles into actionable steps that can actually inform the planning process and set it up and from the beginning. Anyone who is interested in this aspect of the tool, that is breakout group number 1. And my good friend Stuart is running this breakout group. So if you want to come all to Stuart's office and huddle around him, you should go when we break into the breakout rooms to room number 1. And as we said, as a second tool, the spectrum tool is kind of looking at the involvement and the leadership and the level of self-determination of existing projects. So that is when you're trying to find somewhat of a parallel in the conservation standard toolbox. That is a bit like the point where you do the capacity assessment in the conservation standards, where you figure out where am I on a certain spectrum for certain aspects. The example there is from the spectrum of engagement. That's for the International Association of Public Participation, just to give us some way of thinking or some guidance on how a spectrum tool can look like. The idea of such a tool would be to help a community to conduct an assessment, to figure out where are we on a spectrum, summarize those results, and then link the assessment outcome to relevant resources or steps that a team can take to actually improve on that spectrum and to allow you to have more and to track your steps, and that you can actually see over time how you're shifting on the spectrum from one side to another. There are existing tools like this example here. They're mostly qualitative of nature, and they're very flexible. What is a good thing? Flexibility is good because we need to adapt to many processes, but flexibility also creates, to a point, a gap, because it means it often doesn't give you necessarily the specific guidance on what to do about your assessment. You know where you are, but you don't know how to shift there. So our goal, I guess, is to link the assessment to some steps going forward on how you go about that. That's kind of the introduction to the 2 breakout rooms. What I will do now is I will open those breakout rooms for all of us, and you can self-assign yourself to a room. The rooms are titled Pre-Planning, Decision Tree for the tool that Stuart is guiding, and the other group, the second group, is about the spectrum of leadership. So you should be able now to, or you should see on your screen that the 2 rooms just opened. All you need to do is you need to join the different rooms. We will keep the rooms open for around 25, 26 minutes, thereabouts. And before I'm closing the rooms, there will be as well a quick broadcast. And you have 60 minutes to wrap up your conversation. Then we come back into the plenary, and in an ideal world, hear from one person from each room how they went with the exercise and maybe a key insight. Clear as mud?
Okay, the link to the mural board will be shared on the breakout.
Yeah, or alternatively, we can, since some people are already in the breakout room, yes, I would do it.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
I think the feedback comes again from your account. Maybe you could unmute yourself.
Frank, there seems to be some echo.
The echo is Bruce's account because it comes from the speaker. Okay, sorry, Bruce, I muted you by myself now. I don't want to make you silent, but I want to get the echo out. So I'm posting for all of you a link in the chat to a Miro board. And where I would like to see you all to do the exercise that we're planning to do. If you have problems accessing the Miro board, please do let me know. There's people joining. So on the Miro board, you can see two big areas. One area is called Tool 1, and there is an area called Tool 2. And I will share my screen and show you where I would like to work with you. Is there anyone in this breakout group that has not used Miro previously, that needs some assistance with finding their way around the Miro board?
I'm a novice at it, very much, Frank.
So it would be great if you can come all to the space called Tool 2.
Frank.
Yes,
Sorry
Sebastian?
to bother. Just could you please enable the option to share screens on the other group? Because
Sure.
I cannot share a screen.
Sorry, I've done it. Thanks for
Thank you.
popping in.
All right.
Okay, sorry for that interruption. Are we all in the same location? Look, Bruce, and we got Alf on the call. Okay, yeah, Jolene, I can
Hi,
see
Frank.
you. Hey, Luke.
Yeah, I'm here, but I'm on my phone and making pizzas for 3 children, so I'm listening, but not properly engaged.
Okay, no worries. And Jorge, are you as well in Tool 2? Cool. Okay, so what we would like to do is we're trying to break this up into 2 key questions, this exercise. The first question when you zoom in is like, how can you're a conservation practitioner, how would you assess the level of leadership and determination in the different steps of the adaptive management cycle? So when you look, for example, and when somebody comes and asks, it's like, well, like how much how indigenous people involved in your planning or in your implementation or in monitoring and review, and what is the leadership in it? We created for that purpose those 2 columns at the bottom, where the first one is around answers and how do we know level of leadership? How do we assess this level of leadership? And then in the second column that is titled Q2 is like, what are recommendations? What can people do to improve on that? If they have a really terrible engagement with indigenous people, for example, in the implementation phase, what are good ways of improving? And what are tools or approaches or things that have been tried and tested from your experience? You have on the top of the screen a big stack of sticky notes where you can just with your mouse grab a sticky note and pull it down and start typing as you wish. It would be great when you type down your comments if you can put your name to your comment as well in case we need to double check something. Okay, Jorge, perfect. So you who started the process. So that is, I guess, kind of the way. How would you then assess on what spectrum would you see this? Is this kind of initiated by the indigenous communities versus initiated by an external partner? And I guess I'm just playing a little bit with your thought here to kind of to figure out this, where are you on the assessment is kind of like, how do you in a tool of figuring out, of providing some guidance of improving that aspect of it would be to have a pre-planning tool that ensures that you include all the important interest holders, or well, I guess I wouldn't, or rights holders like the indigenous people that are involved in an area. So it is around identifying all the different key people in the process. Mm. while you guys are all populating things, and thanks heaps for all this great feedback. I'll just start putting a example in each of the different boxes to help us trigger thoughts. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Luke, but because we are also awfully quiet and we're all only typing, maybe you can verbally provide us some feedback. With the work that you're doing, like what are thoughts? How would you know the level of leadership, for example, of projects that you're running with traditional owner groups regarding monitoring, like around the involvement in monitoring? Are there any thoughts you want to share, Luke?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think that in terms of what we observe with all the different partnerships, you can tell by speaking to some of the leaders when they're engaged more fully with their respective elders or the different parts of country. So obviously the work we do is obviously with, so we're not talking about working necessarily with a corporate, but so we're sort of higher on the engagement scale. There are some examples, like if there's a group that we know has a, here we might call it a tribe, where we know that their land goes from north to south, but they keep talking about one particular spot. You get hints that they've only got some sort of authority or legitimacy to talk about that one part of country, and you're not seeing it from elsewhere. More formally, what tools would we use to understand that better? I think it's really about the different people you then ask in the community. So you might ask one family like who they're speaking to, who they're not speaking to, and then ask some others actually who they're not speaking to sometimes, and you just piece together all the parts of the story to figure out who's engaged in that organisation and who's not. That's all pretty. I mean, that's sort of on an organic side of things. There's no exact tool that I've used personally, but yeah, I know that you'll know some of those groups too, Frank. But yeah, I'm keen to hear what people think here, really. The tool that I've used pretty well is the governance self-assessment tool, the governance checkup. And that has those types of questions. So where we've been successful is in checking in with a group and saying, all right, who is representative of each of these areas, and can you get them engaged? And when they do, we can see that they're more present, but sometimes it's an undercurrent in sitting in board meetings with these groups where there will be some dominant speakers and others not saying much, or you can see that maybe there's not so much understanding of what's really going on. So it would be good to know how to deal with that type of situation, or if there are tools available for the groups themselves to figure themselves out, because obviously with a good facilitator you can get people to speak, but when they're trying to figure it out themselves, that's probably the trickiest bit.
Okay, cool. I've been typing down. I'm not sure. I guess you cannot. I'm not sure if you can see on your phone. I've just been typing down a few comments as you were going about them. Can you maybe kind of think, because you referred to the governance checkup tool, like what are some of the criteria that the governance checkup tool is using? Like, or I wouldn't like calling them principles or aspects, criteria that help you to determine where you are with your governance.
The tool covers leadership, it covers participation, it covers partnerships. Oh, geez, I can't remember the rest, but like financial resources, human resources, legal sort of realms as well. So in each of those frames, we do have some example criteria, and they can pick and choose and then throw some out if they need to, or they can bring their own criteria in if it's particularly important. So, for example, there's one group that we worked with that has 5 rivers, and they said, all right, we need to have full representation from each of those 5 rivers, and we need to have a man and a woman elder represented there. So they put that criteria down and then assessed themselves against it and said, right, we're pretty good there, but we need to fill in a couple of those positions. That's an example of how we did it.
And when of course, you referred to human and financial resources or access to legal advice. So it is kind of I guess the criteria whether Indigenous people, how much leadership there is like whether they are in charge of or whether they are being, I guess, dependent on other people making decisions. Like, is that the angle?
Yeah. Yes, there's definitely, there is definitely that part. Like some areas might have joint management with parks, and they would say they would potentially rate that joint management area as, moderate. Some others low. Some others they're at the forefront and they're doing just awesome. So, that part's in there. That would be more on the partnership side of things, equitable partnerships. And some, I guess it's from our perspective, because obviously a lot of the groups that we work with we sit one step removed. So the people we're working with, we might work with a handful of the leaders or the elders, and it might take us a good couple of years to really understand what is missing and what the issues are. And we haven't yet delved into how to handle situations where it might require conflict resolution or mediation. It is something we're thinking about as a team here, but we're not at that point to offer that as a solution. Though I think, that would be would probably potentially change quite a few of the groups that we work with. Might be helpful or might not, really depending.
Mm. We will be returning into the plenary in the next 3 minutes or so, just to give you guys a heads up. Is there anyone in this rather small group that would like to volunteer and report back on a key aspect that they really feel strongly about to the plenary? I take silence as a lack of interest on reporting back, but it's perfectly fine. Let me just then pick a point that we should talk about. I think, Charlene, I don't want to single you out, but you think the comment about establishing action committees among community members, and that is your post. Do you maybe want to talk to that and add something like what do you understand as an action committee in your realm of work?
Yeah, so my role of work is mostly we safeguard the community who within our conservation work. So in a way that we want them to take up the responsibility and also to implement to actually for them to demonstrate their role is to establish a action committee comprising of the leaders of the, for example, like when they have when they want to, the aim for this village is to set up a conservation community conservation area, CCA. So in order for them to set up the CCA means they have to have they should be able, they must be able to self-organize. So in order for them to self-organize is through a committee, meaning to say they have a leader and then they have the other role of in the committee that will help them to be more organized in terms of discussion and when they want to gather. So so this is what it's meant for establishment of action committee. So it could be it could be among a community ranger team where the wildlife monitoring work is involved, and it could be also for the community conservation area to be established. So that's what it meant for establishment of action committee here. Oh, so it's comprising of community members. So it also, this committee is also they should be able to represent the whole community, and it is selected voluntary by the other members of the community. And whenever like there's other external stakeholder coming into the village, then usually this action committee will be the one representing the voices of the rest of the community members. Yeah.
Cool.
I hope
Thank
that
you very
makes
much,
sense.
Charlene. That makes perfect sense, and it gives us something. Yeah, that gives us for the report back as well a really good aspect, because there's the self-nomination side of things as well in it. There's the governance aspect, there's the self-nomination aspect. Okay, because we're running out of time, I'll just have to close those rooms. That means we have 60 seconds before we go into the plenary. In 60 seconds, we will automatically be thrown out, so don't feel surprised when you end up in a room with a lot of people looking at you. But yeah, thanks heaps. And equally, this Miro board will be available. Like we will communicate that with everyone. Will be available after the session as well. So if people have time or have other striking thoughts that they're coming up with that they want to add at a later point, that is totally a possibility. And equally for those who couldn't even join today, because we had about 40 subscribers and 12 people showing up, I think, or 13. So there's always all those others that were thrown away to other tasks, like making pizza for the kids. Hi, welcome back, everyone. I do hope that was a good session you had in your breakout groups. Stuart, were you lucky finding a volunteer to report back on any aspect in your
Yes, we had a long discussion about that, and I think I could speak on behalf of the team when I say the universal decision was that it would be me.
Oh,
I know.
this is a totally different outcome than to our discussion.
I know, it was a surprise. It was a surprise result. Took everybody by aback. Look, I'll go very quickly, and everyone can obviously access the Miro board and have a look. But in thinking about the principles, just some really terrific, strong recognition about respecting local protocols, respecting local knowledge systems, and so on. But the one that really captured my imagination that somebody put there was everything is an intervention, and I think that's such a critical point for us as conservation practitioners, that we often forget that. And so, to me, as a principle of guidance, is that everything is an intervention. It was really good. In terms of tools or practical steps or processes, some of the sort of bigger, more structured things that people will mention were things like social impact assessment, FPIC, and things like that. And then a number of others that lent into the principles around, diversity and participation, and how to focus on diversity and participation, relationship and the length of relationships being really critical. And then a number of points around just needing to modify the tools to make them accessible, depending on the community you're working with. So that was the work that the team did. It was great. There's heaps of material there. It was fantastic.
Cool. Terrific. We got as well, we used up a few sticky notes on our side, and I'm trying to bring 2 comments from 2 of my record group participants together. A lot of our conversation kind of went around the concept, around the topic of governance and how decisions are made in a project, if that is in the implementation phase, but equally later on in monitoring and evaluation and everything. So this aspect of governance, Charlene brought an example in around the establishment of action committees that are kind of, I guess, community committees where the elders, the community leaders and key implementers are self-organized. And one aspect there is as well, is the self-organization. It is not appointed by, but it is organically grown from inside. And then Luke, who's working in Queensland, mentioned the governance checkup tool that he's been using in the past to help kind of to figure as a source of criteria and as well as a source of direction on how you could look and consider governance and the control and the power Indigenous people really have. I'm pretty sure, Stuart, you said the same thing in your breakout group. We will keep this board open for people to make comments. We will share as well the link to this board in an email with everyone that has registered for this webinar, to allow people to pop in thoughts that may come at a later point when they have their dinner and they realize, oh damn, why didn't I say that? So there is an option to get back to the board later on. For the last few minutes, let's just get up the right slide here. So where are we getting? How are we going from here forward? And so, as I said, we keep the board. We will collect more thoughts. We will as well collect more thoughts in well, in about half a day, when the Americas are waking up. Sebastian, Christina, Valentina, and myself will be running a second webinar over there with guys from the Americas, North, South, and Central, to kind of to gather feedback as well. All the input we receive from you guys will use to start kind of playing around and coming up with some early drafts and some ways how can all this information that you shared with us look in the shape of a tool. And we want then, I guess, as we said at the outset of the session, we want to test those tools and see whether what we dream up is actually meaningful and can actually work on the ground and work in the different circumstances all of you are engaged. And this kind of a testing of the tools, I would envisage at the moment will happen sometimes in the period between July and August. We have, though, as well already, not the coming week, but the week after, on the 10th of June, we haven't yet advertised it to not confuse people with too many webinars. We're running on the 10th of June a second online workshop. And that is in relation to a comment, the introductory comment from Sebastian. Those tools, they are really at specific points to guide us to assess and to improve community leaderships and self-determination of IPLC. Because there is this lack of practical guidance as part of this collaboration with the Nature Conservancy and conservation management, we want to look as well and start brainstorming some ideas around the needs and possible formats to put a lot of this knowledge that is currently missing into a format, into something that can help a conservation practitioner on the ground to deal with those questions, to address those kind of principles of good engagement and how they can go about them. And this session will happen Tuesday, the 10th of June. For those of us, most of us on this call, one of the calls may be actually on the Wednesday because of the time zones. It will be around the same time. So we will run for the Eastern Seaboard or for the Eastern side of the hemisphere a session at 6 p.m., which is the morning in Africa and in Europe. And then we're going to run a second session a bit later for the Americas again, which is early morning for those other ones. And similar thing with this guidance, we're going to get your ideas, we're going to craft something, and we're going to share a early draft with people and to gauge feedback and figure out how we're tracking. Overarching this project that we are currently undertaking, we are hoping or we are expecting to finish around the September mark. So I'd say give it another month until tools are finalized. So I hope by October we have something that is in a workable format and to share with everyone within the broader CCNet, but equally with, I guess, all the organizations that are involved. And because some of us registered but couldn't attend, we will share a link to the recording, a link to the mirror board with everyone after our workshop tomorrow, so that everyone has an ample chance to provide feedback and to chime in. And with that, I'm just looking to you, Stuart, looking to you, Sebastian, whether there are any closing comments from your side.
Just thanks everybody for taking the time and participating and sharing your ideas. That was really, really helpful.
All right. Sebastian, any words from you?
Oh, thank you all for your participation. And just to mention that this is a process. We're starting with this webinars, but we'll be also contacting internal networks and trying to build more feedback into this, mainly also in relation to the principles part and how we can come to do conservation planning in a more respectful way, how to build up better relations while doing conservation planning to really support self-determination and the decisions that are being prioritized by local communities and indigenous peoples. So this is a process, and we hope to continue walking on this path, collaborating with you and the rest of the people. So thank you for your participation today, and we look forward to continue collaborating.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and for all your input. Let's stay in touch. We'll be writing you emails, and hopefully we'll see many of you at our next webinar on the 10th of June. Thank you. Have a good evening or have a good start for your day, whichever part of the world you're in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.